Hello and welcome to episode 207 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. And we've got a huge back catalogue of guests there, well over 200 episodes now, so please do check that out if you haven't already. Just last week we were speaking with Romantasy sensation,
Yes.
Chloe Peñaranda, about how she used social media to grow her readership. And we're staying in the realm of fantasy, but a different kind of fantasy, this week.
That's right. We're chatting with the wonderful Genevieve Dimova, whose Foul Days came out in June 2024, was book one of The Witch's Compendium of Monsters, and Monstrous Nights is book two of the duology, which came out just October this year. She's an archaeologist. She writes. She's from Bulgaria, moved to Glasgow Uni, so she's kind of Scottish, Eastern European, and she writes. Well, we have a really interesting chat with her about the concept of Slavic fantasy and this kind of, is there such a thing as Slavic fantasy, and is fantasy like people like The Witcher author?
Yeah.
Where does that, is that kind of,
but I think
stories
what
come from?
she makes the point that obviously not all, for years fantasy was a very Western medieval kind of approach to fantasy, kings and queens and all that sort of stuff, whereas then we've started to have different kinds of fantasy. We've had Fonda Lee, who we've had on the podcast before, Secondary World, but with a different influence, and as you say, The Witcher, but as Gen says, it's Eastern European culture and myths and legends. It's not a monolith. So her telling this Bulgarian side of things as well was something that has appealed to readers, because Foul Days was a big hit. And I'm sure Monstrous Nights is doing just as well as well. And we talked to her a bit about it being a duology as well. So there's a lot in this conversation. So we will get into it in a moment. I do want to mention for listeners that we have started a new podcast, a much shorter, punchier, I guess, podcast with just Tarek and I talking about one writing issue that has occurred to us or has been annoying us that week, and you can watch the first couple of episodes on our YouTube channel, and new episodes are going to be released on our Patreon, so you'll be able to, if you want to check out our Patreon, you can check that out. There's lots of other benefits as well, including free books and stuff like that. So please do have a look at those as well. But for now, we'll get straight into the interview after a quick advert for our Writer's Notebook.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
You have heard the podcast before, so you know what the first question is going to be. Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, I did. No. So what happened? I had a cousin who is a year older than me. So when I was like 5 or 6, I thought she was the coolest person ever because she was so old and cool. And so she wanted to be a writer. And obviously I was like, well, I want to be a writer then as well. And my parents kept telling me, oh, she's such a good writer, my cousin. She's so good. You can never be such a good writer. I was like, well, I'll show you. So that was kind of my first foray into writing. I wrote a really bad short story. I think it was like 1 page. I worked on it all day, and then I showed it to my mom. And my mom, being Bulgarian, was just immediately, we're very blunt people. So she was like, this is rubbish. This is not...
No sugarcoating it, yeah.
So yeah, I think that was what kind of prepared me for criticisms. It was very useful.
I can see
so,
that.
Yeah, my cousin has found a normal, sensible job, but I just stuck with writing.
So I mean, yeah, you say you stuck with writing. I think your day job is an archaeologist,
Yes.
and you obviously grew up in Bulgaria, moved to Glasgow. When you were writing, with this interest in writing, I was interested to know, when did you make a switch to writing in English?
Oh, it was a wee while after I moved to Scotland. So I moved to Scotland for university, which was in 2010, to study archaeology. And then it took me a while. I think in general, writing prose in English is very different than writing, like academic writing. I was doing plenty of academic writing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a big switching from writing prose in Bulgarian to writing prose in English. And it was a bit kind of stop and start. Like I started writing some little short stories in English, then moving back into Bulgarian, just kind of doing what I feel like. But at one point I realized that I am reading so much in English that my internal thought process as I'm writing is in English. And then when I'm trying to write stories in Bulgarian, I'm translating from English to Bulgarian, which makes no sense.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was like, I'll just try writing in English. And it was actually Foul Days, which is my debut novel. I read that in Bulgarian, expecting to try to publish it in Bulgarian. And then I was like, well, let's just try this out. Let's just try translating it into English and seeing if it works. And thankfully it did.
So Foul Days, which is your first, well, because I wanted to ask that because it's described as your English language debut. So I was like, do you have other books that were written in other languages, or was this your first book that you ever wrote?
I do have a book. I wrote a book when I was, I think, 16, 17, 18. I wrote a book in Bulgarian that got traditionally published. And it shouldn't have. I think a lot of authors have these stories about these stories they wrote about when they were teenagers and how glad that they are that they never will see the light of day. Put them in the shelf and the drawer, they will never see them again. I got mine published. It's out there. People can read it. And I think it's a fun story. It's a very childish story. It's very like what you would expect a 16-year-old to write. But it obviously gave me the motivation to keep writing. I had some really nice feedback from some very nice people. But ultimately, it's a total mess structurally. I think it's one of those ones where the fact that I'm quite good on the line level masks the fact that the whole story is just absolutely all over the place.
Okay.
But I want to go back, if I can, to the writing in a different language, because I think for a lot of people that is such a difficult concept, because language is structured in a different way. The way verbs are used, all these sorts of things. So, when you write in English, obviously you've lived in Scotland now for some time, you've read in English a lot and stuff, but, did it take you time to build up the confidence to show it to people, to think that this is at a level that I can start submitting this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It took me several years. As I said, I was writing little short stories and I didn't feel confident in those. And then when I started writing a new novel, I wrote it in Bulgarian. translated it. At that point, I was kind of thinking, like, as I was translating, I was editing as well. Mm-hmm. And it was a very time-consuming and very complicated process. I think it was helpful in the fact that as you're translating, you're kind of thinking about your style, and on the line level, it was very useful. But in terms of, in terms of trying to see if I'm good enough for publishing, I was completely not sure. I couldn't tell myself, which I found quite difficult actually, because in your native language, in Bulgarian, I can write a paragraph and then I read it and I go, oh yeah, this is good. Oh no, this is rubbish.
Yeah.
In English, it took me a wee while. I can do it now, but when I first started, I was doing absolutely fine writing in English, but I wasn't as good editing in English. So it was, a very trial and error, a lot of Googling, going through online dictionaries, trying to figure out what's the right word that you need to use. And then eventually I had a draft that was complete. And at that point, there was a mentorship program that was happening, which was called Author Mentor Match, which doesn't exist anymore. So it's a program which matches already published authors or agented authors with unpublished authors like me. And they help you edit your manuscript and prepare your materials for querying. So I thought I'm just going to check this manuscript in there and see what happens. And it was quite competitive. I think there were like 2,000 people who applied and only 50 got selected. So it's not like quite as competitive as querying, but it was. I thought it would be a good sign if I get at least the full request. And then I got the full request. And then eventually I got told that one of the mentors, he selected me. And she sent me this long edit letter, first edit letter I've ever had. And she was like, this is really messy structurally. Again, But I really like all the little details you have there. I like your world building. I like your characters. I like your writing. Should we work on this? And I was like, yes, let's work on this. So the fact that she told me that she likes my writing was really important to me, because that was the bit that I was insecure about. Structure, you can always edit, you can always revise. But the fact that the writing was at the publishable level in English was a nice surprise, and something that gave me the confidence to keep writing in English.
And did you find that when you were, obviously you kind of you cracked the line by line writing in English level, did you find it was harder to discover your voice when you're writing in English, like the tone or the emotions and that sort of thing? Was that harder to come by when you're translating stuff? Okay.
I don't really think so. No, I think I am the sort of writer that voice comes quite naturally to me. So it was one of the things that I actually found quite easy in terms of English.
Okay.
One thing I found difficult was the fact that with voice, sometimes you have to be slightly ungrammatical, especially in dialogue. So finding the confidence to do that in a foreign language took me a couple of years, but I feel very confident in it now.
And so you mentioned the Mentor Match program there, which obviously helped you develop Foul Days. How did you go about finding an agent then after that?
Well, after we'd finished revising, and my mentor had helped me with my query letter, which was very important because it's such a difficult thing to get your head around. So then I started querying, and by that point it was 2020, which was not a great time to be querying, to be honest. But so I was feeling fairly confident in my materials. I was feeling fairly confident in my full manuscript. So I know at that point it was still very common advice to query in batches. So I sent a very small batch. I sent a batch of about 5 queries out, and I got 4 requests back. So I was like, well, this is working.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah.
I thought it was after that, my request rate fell way down because I selected my 5 best matches. But that was a good sign. So I was like, I'm just going to check it all out, because it was 2020. People are getting ghosted. People are not replying for years and years. And I was confident in the manuscript. I was like, I'm not going to do batches from now on. Check it all out. And I sent, I think, about 60 queries to 60 agents that I selected. I thought they're a good match. They're good at selling books. I like the authors they work with. And I started getting lots of requests, and then silence for a while, which I think, again, was very normal in the middle of the pandemic. But eventually, forum rejection started rolling out, which at the time, again, was not common. I think at the time, we all thought if you have a full manuscript request, you're going to get at least some personal feedback. Nothing. Form after form after form. I was thinking,
frustrating.
What's happening here? And it turned out, I think what it came down to was the fact that the manuscript was good. It was in a good shape. It has been revised, but the market was in such a weird place at that point. Like, I had to write fantasy, so we were moving away from the sort of grimdark, really dark and edgy, towards more romantasy and cozy. But we were in the middle period in between those two, and I'd written something that's not like the other, not like either of those.
Yeah.
So a lot of agents were reading, going, "Yeah, that's a nice story, but where will I place this?" And eventually, I found an agent who I actually hadn't queried her in my first big batch. It just popped up on Query Tracker that she's just opened for queries. And she was brand new. Well, a couple of years, but she didn't have many deals under her belt. But I knew she's in a very good agency, Transatlantic, who I knew had great deals, great authors that I love. So I was like, well, if she's with them, she is probably getting good mentorship. And if she's new, that means that she has time for me, and maybe she will take a chance on a slightly.
Yeah, she's hungry. She wants to try and make some deals. Yeah,
exactly. So I queried her, and within I think a week, she replied saying, "Can I have the full manuscript?" And then a week later, she was like, "Can we have a call?" And that was it. And she's
nice.
She's a very good match for me.
Brilliant. And so that was obviously with Foul Days, which is the first in the Witches' Compendium of Monsters. Now, it is. I can see you were talking about there how it doesn't sit easily in a category as fantasy was anyway at that time. Your inspiration, which is unusual, I suppose, given a lot of other fantasy settings, is the folklore of sort of Bulgaria, Eastern Europe, Slavic folklore. I can't say that word. Is that something? Is that the area that you've always wanted to tell stories in, and you've been inspired by?
Yes and no. I think when I first started writing, it was a while ago now, and at that point, fantasy was still very Western European. It was very like knights and kings and queens and dragons, and I started trying to write stories like that, and then slowly in my stories, Eastern European, Bulgarian elements started making their way. I think when you are from Bulgaria, you can't help but write Bulgaria stories. Like, even if you try writing a story, I have a few friends who have tried writing stories set in America because they're like, oh, America's a bigger market, it will sell more easily. And then I read them as someone who's a bit more familiar with the Anglophone market and with Anglophone culture. American culture is obviously different than British culture, but still, there are some similarities there. So I read the stories and I'm like, these are Bulgarians. You've given them American names, but Bulgarian people acting like Bulgarians. So I felt like when I first started seeing that people are interested in folklore outside of Western Europe, like Naomi Novik's books started coming out, Catherine Arden, The Witcher got translated into English. And I was kind of thinking, well, people like this. Let's try it. But with Bulgarian folklore, which, as far as I'm aware, it's not, well, obviously it's not very common in the Anglosphere, not very well known. So I was like, oh, I'll try this. And suddenly it clicked. It was one of those moments of like, oh yeah, this story works with those characters and with those Bulgarian monsters and creatures.
Yeah, I read something you said online that was very interesting, which was that you talked about like Slavic fantasy being a kind of brand in itself in the West, and stuff like The Witcher, etc. As you say, kind of gives this idea that, oh, this is what these types of books and these stories are like. Whereas, really, you were saying that Slavic fantasy isn't really a thing. That there's not like it's there's much more to it, and it's made up of lots of different stuff. It's not just one generic type of story. So is that something which is quite important to you to bring these different viewpoints and different stories and show that there's a lot more variety to Slavic stories than just the Witcher type tales?
Yeah, definitely. I really like The Witcher. It's one of my favorite series. I read it when I was very young and I adore it. But it's obviously very Polish. I think part of the problem is in Western Europe, because we were all behind the Iron Curtain until fairly recently. In Western Europe, Eastern Europe is seen as a kind of monolith. Like, we all have a very similar culture, which we don't. It's kind of like how Spain is different from Britain, is different from Sweden. Poland is different from Bulgaria, is different from Russia.
Yeah.
But because Russia is so big, Poland is also quite a big country, and they export a lot more culture than we do. So I think a lot of people, especially with Russia, there are some political problems there as well, with us being seen as similar, that they like Poland because, we're all Slavs. But the problem is that that's kind of what people expect from you, because they think, Eastern Europe has the same culture or the same language, which you obviously don't. And so when I first started writing, it was actually a lot of Polish stories that were popular. Like now we can like The Witcher. And I was thinking I want to show the folklore of much smaller Bulgaria. But also the thing with Slavic fantasy is that a lot of it was written in a specific way. Like it wasn't just the fact that it's Slavic inspired in terms of folklore. It was also certain style of fantasy, like Naomi Novik's books and Catherine Arden's books are all kind of crossover, female-centric, with a strong romantic subplot, which my book is female-centric with a romantic subplot, but it's not quite as lyrical, it's slightly different. So I think that was one of the things that was also not a problem when I was querying, because obviously it ended well. But I think a lot of people saw in my query letter, this is Slavic fantasy, and they were like, I'm going to get another Uprooted. And then I gave them this mixture of like criminal elements, slightly secondary world, but also urban fantasy, but also Slavic folklore. And they were kind of like, well, this is not Uprooted.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting though, because fantasy as a genre has definitely opened up recently. Because obviously, as you said before, most of the fantasy books that I could read when I was growing up were your classic, Anglo-centric, Western-based type fantasy, medieval, kings and queens, sorcerers, all that sort of stuff. Whereas now you've got, as you say, you've got this Slavic fantasy, but you've got people like Fonda Lee as well, telling a different type of fantasy in a different type of world. So the whole sort of space and play area, I guess, has opened up widely to give, which seems to be a very, very recent development, really.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, Fonda Lee was one of my big inspirations because she writes secondary world, but also urban fantasy, which I really like. And also, obviously, it's non-Western inspired. So yeah, that was really inspiring and just something that I feel like I probably wouldn't have found my space in fantasy quite as easily if that shift hadn't occurred a couple of years, more like a decade before I started querying. Because I don't really think I can write you the sort of big, thick, epic fantasy that's very straightforward and very... Also, as an archaeologist, I have to say, a lot of the medieval fantasy is not that medieval.
It's very much.
There's a lot of little elements that are like borrowed from Iron Age to Renaissance, all mixed together in a big mishmash. So I didn't really feel inspired by that particular strand of fantasy, even though I enjoy reading it as a reader. I love the big, thick doorstoppers.
Let's dive into what your latest book is, which is Monstrous Knights, which is out yesterday at time of recording. So that's very exciting. Literally just 24 hours later. This is book 2 of the Witch's Compendium of Monsters, and it's a duology, so it's the end of the story. So why don't you tell us what Monstrous Knights is about, and we can chat about it.
Well, this is quite difficult because I can't tell you what Monstrous Knights is about without telling you what Foul Days is about.
Exactly. No, as I was saying it, I was like, we're going to need more information here. That's fine. Tell us what the whole series of books is about.
I will do. And I can't tell you about Monstrous Knights without spoilers, so I'm going to start with Foul Days. So Foul Days is a story that is set in a city overrun with monsters during the Foul Days, which is a concept from Bulgarian folklore that after the New Year comes, but before it's been baptized on St. John the Baptist's Day, all sorts of monsters and creatures and ghosts are free to roam the land. So my story starts in the city that the monsters arrive in on New Year's Eve, and our main character is a witch who wants to escape the monsters, even though she knows how to fight them because her horrible ex-partner is the king of monsters, the Tsar of monsters, and she knows that he's coming for her. So she, in a moment of desperation, she trades her magic away to cross the magical barrier around her city, which is kind of inspired by the Berlin Wall. And she finds herself on the other side where there are no monsters and things should be all well, except she realizes that one, her horrible ex-partner is not that easy to shake off, and 2 witches without magic soon perish and die. And so the story starts with her trying to find her magic again, defeat the monsters from her past. And the first book is kind of, it can be read as a standalone, I think, if you want to just have a little taste for the duology. But in the second part, I got to explore a lot more monsters, a lot more little elements of folklore that I love. And I think as a whole, the story has a more satisfying ending.
And it's interesting actually that it is a duology because you know you I don't know, when you think of fantasy you think of trilogies or you think of ludicrously huge numbers
12
of books.
books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, did you always think of it as a duology, or is that just, you know, how the story ended up essentially?
I actually wrote the first book as a standalone, because I was told, as when you're querying, it's better to have a standalone and have that magic phrase in your query letter. It's a standalone with series potential.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was a book that stood on its own. And then it was actually when I had my call with my editor, she said, how do you feel about making this a duology? And as you said, I was more used to the format of trilogies. So in my mind, it was kind of like, I was kind of thinking, what am I going to do in the second book? I feel like the second book slump is really real. Like it often feels more like filler in between the exciting introduction in the first and the exciting ending in the third. So when she said the duology, I was like, yeah, that's such a good idea. I don't need to worry about the second book. I mean, the second book is the ending. And I think the reason she wanted to make the duology was because in the first book, that started alone, but the main big bad was not like defeated at the end in a very convincing way. And my main character has a lot of baggage from her past that she kind of overcome, but it wasn't again a particularly satisfying ending. And there was a romantic subplot with two main characters. The main character and the love interest both have so much baggage that it just didn't feel believable that these two people are going to fall in love in the space of one book. I am a big fan of slow burn, so I was like, if I can slow burn for 2 books instead of 1, that's perfect. So yeah, it was on my editor.
And so did you make much changes to Foul Days then, in order to turn it into the duology? Or, you know, did you make it less of a kind of capping off and leave it a bit more open?
Yeah, I did. I moved some scenes to the second book. It wasn't as big a change as I expected. I left pretty much the whole beginning and middle the same, and then the ending had a few tweaks to it. And then because I am evil, I added the little like cliffhanger epilogue.
Nice.
But yeah, I didn't think of much changing.
Cool. And it's an interesting, like, the strategy that the I think Tor in the US is your publisher, and am I right in saying they kind of led on an interesting strategy where they put book 1 out in June of this year, and then the second one out obviously yesterday in October. So a very tight schedule there, which is quite unusual because often it's like, you know, a year, 2 years between books, you know. So I wonder, what's the thinking on that? What was the reason behind that kind of tight schedule?
The thinking was that they're quite fast-paced books and I think the hope was that people would read the first and want to binge the second. I think nowadays you have so much competition for readers' attention. There's so many books coming out, and you're also competing with films, television series, video games. Everything is going on. So you kind of, I feel like often if you have a book out and then you wait too long for the sequel, a lot of people lose interest. They're more interested in other books. They want more standalones or whatever. So the idea was that we'll kind of play on that binge culture that people want to have the sequel immediately. And also, the fact that it's a fast-paced kind of less literary, more pulpy fiction. It means that it worked well for that sort of format because we released it in paperback first, which is cheaper. You can carry it around easily, read a couple of pages on the train or whatever, and then hopefully you finish the first one and you go, oh, I will read the second one immediately. That was essentially the idea.
And did you, just wondering about the sort of process, because obviously that is a very quick publishing schedule. I mean, did you have both books essentially finished before the first one came out then?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I've had the second one finished for about a year now, just so we have time to do all the things that publishing needs to do, like copy edits and proofs and all sorts of little bits and pieces, sending it out for reviews.
And are you someone that how long does it take you to write a book? Do you have like a strict regimen of writing a certain number of words a day and things like that?
No, I don't. I really wish I did. I think it would be really nice and disciplined of me if I did. But no, I am the sort of person who needs a long time to get into the mood of writing. So if I sit down, the first hour I write, I may produce like 20 words, 20 to 50, 200 to 500 is what I was trying to say. But I'm very slow at the start. And then as time passes, I get quicker and quicker. So like 5 hours in, I am hammering out 1,000 words in an hour very easily. So I tend to write in big periods of time during the weekend. That's the only time I have time. And I'm actually reducing my hours at my day job to only 30 hours a week next year. So hopefully that will help me, give me an extra day for writing. So yeah, how long it takes me to write a book really depends on the book. 5 days was a long process, as I told you. It took years and years. But then Monstrous Nights was 4 months for first draft and a couple of weeks for revisions. It was very, very quick. And I think it was because I already knew the world. I already knew the characters. I knew what kind of conflicts they're going to get into. So I just sat down and I wrote it. And now second book syndrome, which is very real, which is the problem that a lot of debut authors have with the second book, is hitting me on the third book. Because the second one was a sequel, so it felt like a continuation.
So this is like
I'm not ready to write the third, and I'm suddenly finding myself really blocked again, which hasn't happened to me for years. But I'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I mean, what are your techniques for dealing with that sort of thing when you do get stuck like that?
Well, it's not a great technique. I'm afraid I don't have any good tips for you. But my technique is to just stop and take a break and read lots of books and kind of try and refill the well. Which is not really your deadline.
What do you? Is it important for you when you pause and read books to read books in the area that you're writing? Like, do you like to try and keep yourself up to date with what the current trends are, what's going on in the fantasy world, or do you read something completely different so it doesn't influence you too much and you can keep a firm line between them?
I don't do it deliberately, to be honest. I just read whatever I'm in the mood for. I do read a lot of fantasy. I think it's always good to keep up to date with the conversation that's happening. But occasionally, I spend a lot of time reading just very recent fantasy releases before I query it, just as a way to find myself comps and kind of get the feel for the market. And eventually, I got a bit bored, to be honest. I was like, this is great. I love fantasy, but I feel like reading something else. So I sat and read all of Ian Rankin's crime novels.
Okay, very different.
That was a great reset. So just whatever I feel in the mood for. I don't deliberately not read fantasy, but sometimes I need a wee break.
Yeah.
And obviously, Foul Days was really well received. On both sides of the Atlantic, I think it's fair to say. And for the book 2 launch, you were very brave. You did an AMA on Reddit and Ask Me Anything on Reddit, which I always think I don't like posting anything on Reddit because someone will always tell me I'm wrong. But I think it seemed that from what I looked at, you had a really good interaction with readers. So it looks like you've built up a good base of support of people that want to read that next one.
Yeah, hopefully. The response on Reddit was surprisingly nice because, as you said, it can be a bit of a difficult environment sometimes.
Yes.
Their fantasy subreddit tends to be just lots of readers, lots of people who love books, and I always feel more comfortable in an environment with bookish people.
And I also saw that both of your books have been picked up by Owlcrate, who did a really gorgeous version of them. There was like sprayed edges and hardback and stuff. And how does that come about? And is that something which you think has quite a big impact on sales? Is it what do people really seem to love? I think these kind of fancy editions,
special editions.
They are huge. Just now, it's really good. Like I was very lucky to be picked by Owlcrate. What happened was that my publisher pitched me for them. They each subscription box has a slightly different angle that I think they are aiming at, slightly different target readers. Like the Broken Binding is going more for epic, Owlcrate is going more for like fast-paced, female-centric fantasy, and then you have all the romantasy boxes that are going for romantasy, obviously. So each book box is slightly different, and I really like the books that Owlcrate select so far. So when I heard that they've selected my book, firstly, I was very surprised because obviously that's huge, that's really cool. But I, at the same time, wasn't that surprised because I was like, oh yeah, all these books that I am inspired by have been Owlcrate selections.
Yeah.
So they selected my book. I think they have readers who read lots of recent releases. Their monthly subscription is purely new books, and then they do like special sales for older books. So they read everything new that comes out, and they select one adult and one young adult book per month. And I think they have some new subscriptions coming up as well. I think there's lots of new genres that different crates are trying to break into science fiction and horror, etc.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to become a bigger thing rather than a smaller thing. And in terms of sales, it was amazing. Like that was several thousand sales right off the bat on release day.
Wow. So sales through these boxes, like even though the kind of all the editions different and it's a different cover, etc., that still counts as your sales for your overall targets for your advance and stuff.
Yes, in a way. I think it works differently in Britain and in America. In Britain, they don't count towards I'm talking rubbish. In Britain, they do count towards things like bestseller list. In America, they sadly don't.
Right.
Sadly.
Okay.
But it depends, because at the same time, some people have pointed out the fact that they don't count means that different books get the chance to get on the bestseller list. Anyway, so it depends on your contract, it depends on subscription box, depends on if you're trad or indie, how exactly those sales count. So for me, they don't turn up on my Bookscan, which is a bit annoying because I go into Bookscan and I know I've sold much more than that. But yeah, I think in Britain they do.
Okay. Yeah, it does. It is a relatively, or it seems to be quite a relatively new thing, this crates thing. And obviously fantasy definitely led the way in that, I think. But now it does seem that other genres are trying to get into it. Like you were saying, I think there's now a crime box as well. There's, so there's different types of these crates that people can subscribe to, and it is a good way. If you're into a specific type of book, I guess, then it's a great way to get the latest and special editions.
I mean, I do think that like these boxes, although as you say, there's all these new genres now. I think the kind of sci-fi, fantasy, that those are probably the ones which I see being the most compatible with these kind of subscription boxes.
Yeah,
because I think people there's a lot easier to get little gifts that are like aligned with a fantasy novel or a design of something or a pin or whatever that fits that world. And I feel that fantasy of sci-fi authors quite like having a nice physical book on a shelf that looks nice. Whereas I sometimes think like crime authors, I'm not sure if they really are that fussed about having fancy editions. I'm sure not all, I'm speaking not for all crime readers, obviously, but I feel like fantasy sci-fi lends itself much more
readers,
to that nice.
It's much more
readers,
disposable,
I
think.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like if you're writing a police procedure, reading a police procedure.
Yeah, and it's quite short compared to,
unless you want all of the Ian Rankins on your shelf, you don't really care.
Exactly. No, I think it's like that with romance as well. Romance readers read so much; they just go through books. But I feel like I'm sure they want like a special edition of their favorite book, but I don't feel like they'll be quite as interested in special edition of a brand new debut as much.
Yeah. I suspect that's
it's like just on the special editions as well. It's interesting, isn't it? Because for like a big fantasy, a favorite fantasy or SF book, as you say, I'm thinking of one of my favorite books, Liza Locke Lamora, has. It had the special editions that Gollancz came out with that I got, and then Broken Binding then did another special edition that had different artwork and different plates in it and all that. So
you buy that one too.
I didn't. I resisted buying that one. Although out of the two, I wish I'd bought that one because that had lots of cool artwork in it, I have to say. But yeah, it is interesting how these things work, and it all adds to the sales and success of the authors, I guess. I was going to ask more about sort of future stories, I guess. But you've obviously drawn a lot on your Bulgarian heritage and folklore in these books. You've been in Scotland a few years. Would you ever want to draw on the folklore and myths of Scotland tell a story as well?
Yeah, I think I would. I'm actually writing the book 3. That's giving me so much trouble just now. It's a book set. It's a murder mystery in a lighthouse. So it's all sea monsters going around.
Oh, that's cool.
It's kind of the monsters have Bulgarian names. The characters have Bulgarian names. Like culturally, I'm thinking of it as a Bulgarian book. But at the same time, I spent quite a lot of time on St. Kilda in the North Atlantic digging a couple of years ago. And I also really love the Western Isles of Scotland. I have family there. So kind of little Scottish inspirations and details are definitely finding their way in the story. So the story is ending up kind of a mixture between Bulgarian and Scottish, like I am.
Yeah, nice. Well, that's cool. That's great. Yeah.
Does your archaeology background did you ever have anything there that you can draw on? Does it lend itself to storytelling? I mean, I guess there's stories in from what you find in the ground and stuff, but I don't know how easy it is to translate that into a book.
I feel like it's easier to write stories about archaeologists when you're not an archaeologist, because you, as an archaeologist, you just know how much boring, everyday, just mundane tasks go into the job. So if you're
I've seen Indiana Jones.
Not Indiana Jones.
That's not true.
You write stories like that, you're like, oh, archaeologists are such great adventurers going around and fighting, punching Nazis. In real life, we spend so much time just digging in the mud, and it rains, it's horrible. So I feel like I don't want to particularly write an archaeological novel, because I think I'll get just bogged down in like describing characters, writing context sheets and drawing section drawings and arguing about the color of the soil and things like that. So, but I feel like being an archaeologist helps in terms of more like thinking about societies and thinking about people. Like I became an archaeologist, not a historian, because I'm interested in lives of ordinary people, not like kings and queens and the sort of people that books were written about. I care more about like blacksmiths and merchants and peasants. So that's kind of something that I seek out in my reading and in my writing as well. I like writing stories about working class characters with normal jobs. And also, I think as in archaeology, we kind of have to think about about how societies function, about how if you have one technology in one place, it doesn't necessarily mean it's reached another place. It's the fact that societies are not a monolith, technology is not a monolith. I think that really helps trying to write a fantasy novel and inventing your own world.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. It's interesting though, because, it's there's that old adage, isn't it? Write what you know. And you are, in a way, because you're bringing all that knowledge in the way that you've just described, but also you absolutely wouldn't want to, as you just said, write a story that is absolutely about an archaeologist, on a dig or something like that. Yeah.
It gets to the point where you know too much about the subject.
Yeah.
Does that mean that when you watch something like Indiana Jones that you get annoyed because you're like, that's not anything like a real archaeologist? That's, To
be honest, I've kind of just put it to the side. Like, there's two categories of archaeologists in my mind. There's real archaeology, and then there's made-up archaeology.
Hollywood,
yeah. And I quite like Indiana Jones. We actually used to get together into like a film at a night in the Archaeology Society back at university, and we watched off Indiana Jones.
Yeah, excellent. So, the new book is just out. Monstrous Knights just out as we record this. You're working on the next one, as you said, and hopefully you'll get over the difficulties that you're having with that one. I mean, do you have plans beyond that, or is it just concentrating on that one at the moment?
I'm kind of concentrating on that. I have a couple of ideas lined up for later. I found that when I first started writing, I had a really hard time coming up with ideas. And then, I don't know, you kind of tune your brain into picking out little bits and pieces of other pieces of media of other books that inspire you. And you go, oh, I'll write a book about that. So I'm kind of filing them in the back of my mind. I have sent a couple of proposals to my editor, which is why she picked the Sea Monsters book. She was like, oh, that falls quite nicely after your City Monsters book. Yeah. So that's why we focused on this one. But I have a couple of other things in the works that I'm hoping I get to write eventually.
What was the last book that you're in?
I'm so glad I've listened to this podcast before, because I'm prepared. Because imagine whenever someone asks you about like a favorite book or the last
book.
Exactly. I don't think I've ever read a book.
No, what's a book? So the last book I read was Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan, which is an isekai kind of portal fantasy about a girl who has cancer, terminal cancer, and kind of fairy godmother appears in her hospital room and tells her, if you go to this world of your favorite novel and you retrieve the special flower, you're going to get cured. So she goes through the door and she discovers that she's been reincarnated in the world of the novel as one of the evil characters. And she immediately really likes that because, like, she was saying, like, if you have terminal illness, people treat you as you're very fragile and delicate. And suddenly she's this cool, the beauty dipped in blood who goes around and, like, does evil deeds. And everyone expects that from her. But then eventually, as the novel progresses, she starts realizing that the people in the novel are actually real people, not just made up. And that's how the plot starts rolling.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
It's really cool.
What about the last film that you watched?
So I'm writing a murder mystery, so I've been watching murder mysteries. So I've just watched Glass Onion, which I really
like. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
And what about a TV show?
This is kind of embarrassing. I've been rewatching Murder, She Wrote.
Well, that's research, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've seen it already. I just felt like it. The new series I've been watching was House of the Dragon. I'm on episode 4. Again, slightly out of date, but I'm getting there. I've seen all the spoilers, so I know exactly what will happen.
Yeah. But it's interesting with things like Murder, She Wrote. I know everyone sort of laughs at it or whatever, but, you know, they do have to come up with, you know, they came up with
Yeah, it's very inspirational.
Murder mystery twists
so you can pull stuff out of stuff like that, even though it's such a ludicrous setup of.
I know the concept. Why is this old lady constantly just murders happening around her?
Exactly.
Why is nobody investigating her?
I watched what's the recent Rian Johnson TV show? It's like basically a Columbo, kind of modern retelling of a Columbo story with Natasha Leo. What's her name? Her from Christ, Tarek.
I'm going to have to look this up. Keep talking, Tarek. Keep talking.
Okay. So basically, it's a really good show, and it's rather than a whodunit, it's a how do they solve it? So like it's every episode starts off like the Columbo show did,
like Columbo,
with the kind of crime happening, and then it winds back, and then she comes on the scene. Poker Face, that's it. She comes on the scene, and it's how she cracks
Natasha
it. And
Leon.
Natasha Leon, that's it. So as a viewer, you know who the baddie is, and you know what they did, but it's watching her solve it. And it's a really weird, it's a different style completely. And at first, I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this or not, but actually, it's quite fun watching how she unravels it, even though you know what she's to unravel.
Yeah, that looks really good. I'll have to look that up because I love Columbo.
If you like Columbo, you'll love this because it's just a modern telling of that, basically.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I'll look that up.
Excellent. The last thing.
We're going to say the very last thing. As you know, super quick fire, either or, and there's only one right answer. So if you know what the right answer is, okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's start off with Scotland or Bulgaria. I know, it's a brutal one.
Hey.
That's a hard one to begin. Go ahead. You've got
to live in Scotland because I live here. To grow up in Bulgaria because I grew up in Bulgaria.
Okay,
we'll accept
that. That's fair enough.
Yeah. TV or cinema?
TV. I really like being comfy on the sofa in my pajamas.
Night owl or early bird?
Oh, night owl. I can't function in the morning. I can't wake up. Like, if I wake up for work, I spend the first couple of hours in, like, a daze until about 1 o'clock. I suddenly go, oh, I'm productive now. So, yeah, I only do my writing at night. I can't function in the morning.
Fair enough.
Music or no music when you're writing?
Oh, when I write. I actually can do both. I don't know if you've read On Writing by Stephen King. He talks about writing and listening to very loud heavy metal. So I read that when I was like 15. I internalized that. I was like, I'll be like Stephen King. So I started doing that. I kind of got myself used to it, but then eventually I I lived in a big house with a big family, so there was constantly someone going back and forth, listening to the television, playing computer games. I'm kind of used to writing with background something. Doesn't need to be music, just some kind of noise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last, and some would say most important question, paper book or ebook?
I'm about to disappoint you.
Oh.
I mean, she's sitting in front of a large.
I know. I should have gone for audiobook. If I'd said audiobook or ebook, what would you have gone for?
Audiobook.
Lose every way, Tarek.
Screwed either way. Yeah.
No, I really like listening to books because I work a job that is quite repetitive, so I like having an audiobook constantly going. But out of ebook and paper, I'm going paper, so yes.
Yeah, the archaeologist is never going to pick an ebook, is she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it turns out Indiana Jones isn't actually a documentary.
Got it. This is what was let down the time I thought that CSI was really just you got out there and solve crimes, and
you solve crimes simply by taking your sunglasses off.
Turns out you spend days routing grids of strings over the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Boring.
But yeah, no, I enjoyed that chat a lot again, and you know, I'm always in huge admiration for people that can write in a second language in a way that is,
I know, it's amazing.
Accessible to everyone. It is incredible, and I never really thought about it, but obviously what you do, it's one thing to learn the language and how you speak it properly and stuff, but to be able to convincingly write language wrongly, if you like, as you were saying, sometimes you need grammar to be wrong or people to say things in certain ways in dialogue and stuff like that.
And even just getting the, it can be grammatically correct, but you're getting tone and voice across, and that's really, really impressive.
Yeah. So, and as I said at the start, Foul Days obviously was a huge success. Hope Monstrous Nights as well. We'll put a link to those books so you can buy them in the podcast description. But next week we are moving away from the world of fantasy, although not completely, because there are sort of time slip aspects and stuff, I think, in our next guest's book.
That's right. We're chatting with Alan Howarth next week, who Fallen Feathers is his first novel. And as Marco says, it's a time slip novel. It combines myth and folklore and a contemporary tale of family, love, and dangerous secrets. Very exciting premise. That's just been released last month at the time of recording. And he's had a fantastic history of working in very interesting jobs. Worked for Apple for a long time. A lot of technology jobs he's had, which I think has really impacted how he's kind of disrupted the model in terms of getting his book out there in perhaps not the usual manner that a lot of authors would.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's got some amazing blurbs for his book from people like Stephen Fry and stuff like that. So please do tune in for that episode. As I mentioned at the start, we do have a Patreon, so please do check that out. You can come along to the Patreon and join for free, which will get you access to our Discord, and we're trying to grow the community there so we can have a bit of chat about writing and about other stuff on there as well. So please do check that out. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so in a number of ways. You can send us an email, which is podcast@writegear.co.uk, or you can search us on social media. We are on all of them now, on Blue Sky, more than before perhaps. Just search for UK Page One.
Yeah, Blue Sky and Instagram, I think, are probably our primary social media now. We are still on the one that used to be called Twitter, but I'm not sure how long we'll last. We'll see.
It does feel like everyone is draining away from that place now, doesn't it? But also, please do get in touch with us if you have any questions or comments. We're always very happy to read them, unless, of course, you are slagging us off.
Yeah,
they will not
in which case, there's no need to get in touch with us.
We have enough crippling self-doubt without anyone else adding to it.
Exactly. That's what being an author is all about. But yeah, otherwise, have a great week. Please do tune in to our drafting notes episode this week as well, and we will speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.